You are not writing more lesson plans, are you? Stop it. Just stop it. Just for a bit, just for a little bit. Because I'm going to ask you teachers, especially new teachers, to take a step back and walk down memory lane with me, an old teacher who didn't start her career so bombarded with all of the things you guys are being expected to do to prepare every day for a lesson. Okay? So let's go. Hi, I'm Molly. I am a former middle school gifted English teacher. I'm also a mindfulness coach, a yoga teacher, and a PD provider for teacher trainings in the state of Illinois. And I am also the host of Rainy Day Plans YouTube channel, where I share support for teachers, parents, and anybody who works with kids in order to help with their energetic development. So, the reason I'm here today is to talk to teachers about how they're approaching the teaching part of their classroom. And this is not even remotely a criticism because I think that you guys are amazing right now. That young teachers in particular always come into the teaching profession with so much enthusiasm, so much passion, and lots of new ideas, right? Things that we didn't learn about when we were back in college and learning to be a teacher, or perhaps doing in our classroom year after year after year. So it's really nice to get that fresh perspective and that youthful energy. But what I've been noticing is that a lot of those young teachers are like hightailing it out of there, getting out of the classroom after just a couple of years because they're so frustrated and worn out and disillusioned and not feeling very supported. So, this is my attempt at providing some support. I'm not an administrator. I can't change any of the policies in your classroom, but I can support you in lots of the different things that I learned along the way in how to manage yourself as a teacher and tips on how to manage your classroom. And a lot of it goes back to pre-computer, definitely pre-cell phone era. Now let's talk about that because Gen Z teachers are also the first students to have entered probably my classroom and many other classrooms and been handed a tablet or an iBook or some other type of computer program and were encouraged to use it on a regular basis. In fact, that was a new expense for school districts was to purchase these first for a school, then for classes to use, and then now we're at one-to-one, right? Every kid gets one. And that has had some wonderful benefits, but I think because other things came along with that, things outside of our control, like social media, we quickly discovered that there was a lot of easy distraction and now we know even like harm that can happen with too much time with these screens. And unfortunately, if you're a Gen Z teacher, that's you, right? You have lived your life not only with that, but you are the first generation of teachers to have had an experience on a computer dating back to maybe even preschool, definitely in your elementary years. I didn't have that. A lot of millennial teachers didn't have that until maybe closer to their high school years. So that is your benchmark. My benchmark, on the other hand, is like the smell of a mimeograph. That's it. When I was in school, it was mimeograph, which was literally the ink being like smeared onto paper when we got copies. And the first thing you would do is like smell it, right? I don't know that it was good for us, but we smelled that paper. And we wrote in notebooks constantly, and our teachers wrote on the chalkboard. And do I carry with me some trauma of some nails on chalkboard? Yes, it was horrible. But that was my whole entire learning experience all the way into Well, definitely into college, there was still a lot of writing on chalkboards and work that was done on chalkboards, but now I was using a typewriter, and some of the rich kids had computers and word processors, not even a computer, a word processor. So when I started teaching, my lesson planning was done by hand, right? It was in a book. At most, someone might type up on their typewriter the lesson plans. And literally that's what it was. It was just like, what's our main book? Look through the book. What pages are we covering? When are we doing a review, and when are we taking a test? Okay? When is there a field trip? When is there an assembly? Things like that. So the lesson planning was just kind of scheduling. It was scheduling the curriculum that was in the book. And then I also would receive teacher materials, right, that I would use to give instruction. So the students had their student book, and I had my teacher book, and I used the teacher book as the resource to teach. So I wasn't creating curriculum. I wasn't creating quizzes. I wasn't creating tests. I wasn't creating discussion questions. I wasn't creating any of that. I created fun projects, right? I said, let's do a book report. Let's do a diorama. Let's do a play. Let's do a debate. So I created the plan for those things. And then we as a class, or my students, kind of as a culminating activity or within the activity, they would participate. So the amount of time and effort I had to spend on the act of lesson planning was way less. The amount of time I spent thinking about their learning and where they were and what they were ready to do, and if we were ready to move on, and how anybody who, failed something and needed to go back, like that time, I would say it was at least similar. Maybe we go into it more because we have clearer data to look at. But even the data is looking at it. The thinking still is just time thinking. And I could do that in the car. I could do that on my lunch break. I could do that while I'm watching my students read. I could do that while I was taking a walk with my kids or my dog. So the time spent thinking about what they needed to learn was always, to me, the most important part of lesson planning. And then as we got more tools that made it easier to create more faster, that's what I started doing. But the kids themselves were still learning at the pace of learning, They were still only able to absorb what a 7th grade brain can absorb, as individuals, vary. But they were only learning that at the human pace of learning. And that's where I think things have gotten, a little derailed. Certainly students can be taught something sooner. And so if they're taught something sooner, if they're taught to read sooner and they're able to process it and do it, then they'll be ready for the next thing maybe earlier than in previous years. And the kindergarten curriculum that I see right now looks very, very familiar to the 2nd grade curriculum that I experienced as a student, as a good student, as a kid who could read at the age of 4. And it looks very similar to the curriculum that my children, who are millennials, experienced when they were in 1st grade. So that those learning expectations, those learning objectives have been moved down in the schools that I've seen, the limited schools that I've seen have moved down a year, over the last few decades, right? And along with that, the pressure and expectations on teachers has gone up, because now teachers are teaching what might be considered a higher standard or higher expectation than children were traditionally, in my tradition, than children had been expected to master something in previous years. So that's an additional pressure, isn't it? It comes from a really good piece of data, which is that if a student hasn't learned to read by third grade, that the rest of their educational trajectory is greatly at risk, because from third grade on, the amount of reading and content reading and technical reading just amplifies, right? So if they haven't learned to read by third grade, they are definitely at risk. So, let's make sure they can read by third grade. But then it's like, well, no, let's make sure they can read by second grade. Well, why stop there? Let's make sure they can read by first grade. Because if they can read by first grade, then they should be able to be writing 5-paragraph essays by second grade, right? But the age and the development of children didn't do the same thing. Kids didn't develop as, child development faster just because they were learning to read faster. And if you've ever worked with a gifted student, especially a young gifted student, you'll see that dichotomy, that very young behavior with very old knowledge, and so kindergarten teachers are still having to do the work of being a teacher to a kindergarten development, still helping to develop a 5-year-old with their sense of who they are and their awareness and some of their self-care skills and things like that. And now also you're teaching them phonemic recognition, some decoding, math facts. Just amazing. Kindergarten teachers, wow. So I kind of went on a tangent there, and I'm going to hopefully delete a lot of that. But just so you know, that's what that's what I tend to do. So I'm going to back up a bit, and we were going to back up anyway. Okay. So I might have veered off a little bit there, and I'm going to try to rein myself back in when I edit this. But what I wanted to approach with you, there is a place for the pedagogy of teaching, right? The technical part, the knowledge you need to have as a teacher and how to apply that to your classroom. This is not that place. This is not that place. This is the place to really develop as the tour guide to your students on their learning journey. And that includes you as part of that journey and how you want to show up for that journey. So I am going to put a link in the description for a learning map that I'm going to show you real quickly, and use it, adapt it, come back and work with me on developing a part of that for yourself. But it is kind of I think of it as like the parallel or personal part of your lesson plans, the part that no administrator is going to ask to see. This is the part for you to know how you want to develop, so that you are not spending your days and nights and the whole school year just feeling stressed out, and at the end of the year going, who am I now? All I am is older, more tired, and more sick. I don't want that for you. I want you to be a learning person along the way, and especially learning about yourself and developing yourself. And this is for everyone at any age, but I do want to say it's probably really important for younger teachers. And I'm not saying that with any sense of arrogance or patronizing, because I remember being that young teacher as well. And I had to deal with things differently as a young teacher than I did once I had several years of experience behind me. And because, as I started, because your experience may have been a little overly dependent on technology, which we are now seeing. So you unfortunately may have been the recipient of that. I would like to be your support in kind of disentangling some of that and relearning how, or maybe learning for the first time, how to learn without the computer in front of you, because it has we used to do it. We used to do it, and you can still do that. I'm not recommending that you only, that you throw out your computer and never use it to learn or to create lesson plans, but I want you to know this is the secret. This is why I said we are not in the school. We are not in the classroom. We're not in the school building. This is not professional development, even though it's going to help you develop professionally. You need to know that the less you do on your computer, the better you're going to feel. It's just the truth. Maybe not initially, because we have been, as we can see in our students too, we've become a little bit addicted, and we know we're addicted because if the electricity goes out and we can't do something on our computer, or we can't use our phone, like we get a little panicked. Oh no. And the panic comes from knowing that you suddenly can't know something. You don't have access to instant knowledge of something. You don't have access to instant communication. And that feels panicky. That feels panicky in me, because I now have 15, 20 years of using this technology to contact anybody I want, anytime I want, or even if I don't contact them, of learning how I can find out what they're doing, where they are they okay, things like that. That panic is self-imposed. That panic is something we have put on ourselves, and we taught ourselves that panic. So for example, when I was teaching in a classroom that did not have a computer in the classroom at all, not a teacher computer, no kid computers. Certainly I didn't have a cell phone. Nobody else had a cell phone. There was no technology in the classroom that gave me access to the outside world, aside from maybe a landline phone. And yet, parents were not calling me all the time. Parents weren't driving up, knocking on the door of my classroom to find out how their kids are doing, or to ask them when do they need to be picked up after practice. I didn't have parents calling me, leaving messages asking what's their kid's grade, and when am I going to grade that test, and what can their kid do to bring their grade up. That doesn't mean that parents never called, but when they called the office and they left a message, and then I received that message and I would return the call. But you can see how, that's a process. That takes time. And not many parents were then impulsively, just making that phone call, because there was time involved in it for me and them. And so those phone calls I got were pretty essential, mostly, right? There was a problem. Ditto with me calling home. I didn't call home very often because of a problem. We also would write notes home a lot. And the note went home with the child, and the child gave the note to the teacher, or to the parent. And that was the expected form of communication. And guess what I did after I sent that note with the student? Nothing. I was because there was nothing. I wasn't checking my email. I wasn't worried that I was going to have to stay after school and suddenly I knew that I would, at most, there would be a phone message waiting for me the next morning. That would be the earliest that there would be something. If it was that type of, obviously, if it was an emergency, they would go downstairs. They would go to their office if it was an emergency. So I felt relaxed. My students felt relaxed most of the time. I never heard students use the word stress in the 1990s. I have to tell you that. They never told me that they were feeling stressed out or pressured. And I taught gifted students. So I'm trying to think, maybe one or two could have said that once in a while. But it wasn't a thing. It just wasn't. And I know you're going to I'm going to see comments. I was feeling it. Maybe I guess, like, I don't think I can answer that question about myself at that age. I can imagine myself feeling stressed at that age, but I don't. But I just remember feeling life. It was life. Okay, tangent. The things that went home with me at the end of the day would be my lesson plan book, perhaps, or a stack of papers that if I needed to read or correct something, stack of papers. And of course my red pens, because I liked red, or pink, if I could find a pink pen. But I used the supplies from the school, and the school bought blue, black, and red pens and a bunch of pencils. So I used those because, duh. Because why would I buy my own? I bought my own for myself. And the reason I bring that up is because I would like you to experience that. So you might want to think about how you could experience, like, breaking away from computer dependency or computer usage in everything. Because if you grew up using it, and I know that you were taught to use every new thing that came out. And I was one of the teachers doing that with my students, right? Like, ooh, this came out, let's do it. Now, there wasn't a lot yet. There was like iMovie and SimCity and I don't know, some other, obviously word processors. And so because, unfortunately, you may have been the guinea pigs for every new ed tech initiative that was released, and because teachers in schools were told this is the way of the future, even when we were feeling like, hey, I don't think this is working, or I don't think this is going to be the best for them, especially when it came to like handwriting. If you were never taught grammar, if you were never taught cursive writing, if you were never taught flashcards, or if you were never taught how to use index cards for a research project, you missed out on that part. You were taught different skills that may have, been really awesome. But if we're trying to break away from too much computer use and an overemphasis on these teeny tiny details, I'm going to encourage you to visit Rainy Day Plans every now and again, where our lesson plannings, we will do some lesson planning that has more to do with differentiating, making sure that we can reach all of our students in a healthy, fun, very balanced, tech-balanced way. And it may or may not exactly coincide with what your school district, like what their resources are, or what their expectations are. So I'm not recommending that you usurp that or ignore what they are recommending. But we will look at how we can incorporate the skills that, first of all, you might have missed out on practicing and enjoying as a student, and then how you might incorporate that into your own classroom. And if you're not a teacher and you're just like, yeah, I just never learned that, then you want to come to some of our videos as well. And some of them will be live where we get to actually talk about what particular thing you've missed. You can also put in the comments here like, hey, can you do this? Can you show us this? Can you go over this? Or can we do one of these together? Such as cursive writing or tying a shoe. That's a skill, that's a skill that a lot of kids are missing out on, is tying a shoe. God, do I know how to do a short video? Not even remotely. Nope. Because if once I get talking, man, spiral, 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 spiral. Unfortunately, even my grandkids know that about me now. That's a shame. Is it? Is it a shame? Or, or maybe it's not a shame. Maybe it's good. Future Molly has decided to wrap up this fun little spiral. So check out the next video for an overview of the learning map that I started talking about earlier in this video. Thanks for visiting and subscribing and liking and helping to grow my channel, supporting the slow, mindful, and intentional lifestyles that impact the energetic development of children. Bye. Thank you for being a teacher and for everything you do for our students. Goodbye. Can't wait to see you again.